Well, hello, everybody. We want to welcome you to the wonderful Provincetown Public Library, and East End Books is thrilled to be involved with this special event. And I want to thank everything she does. This fantastic head librarian, and her great assistant, I'm told, is lounging and resting upstairs. One of my favorite librarians.
She's a dog.
But we will have books for sale afterwards if you want, and Jim will personalize them if you want that. And then if there are any left, those signed copies will be at our store. So if you're thinking about it, you'll be able to get them later on. Jim reminded me that time flies. It's been 2019 since we last had them here at the bookstore for an event. And this book, I know a lot of people are like me, that they've been very excited and waiting for this book to come out. It is fantastic. It is I think it's among the best types of nonfiction books where you're so engaged that you feel like you're a fly on the wall and you want to be there and wish that you were there when that was happening. I just absolutely love this book. Jim Hoberman was for over 3 decades a film and culture critic for the Village Voice. His previous books have explored the subculture of midnight movies, the rise and fall of Yiddish-language cinema, the international communist avant-garde, SoHo performance art, and the underground filmmaker Jack Smith. His Found Illusions trilogy, which includes The Dream Life, Make My Day, and An Army of Phantoms, used Hollywood to refract the history of the Cold War. This book is a groundbreaking cultural history of 1960s New York from the legendary writer of art and film. As you might have heard the discussion, there'll be a combination of reading and discussion, and then we'll have the movie. I want to thank you again for coming. One final thing is we're winding down, sadly. It's hard to believe. August is almost over with the last few events at East End Books. Tomorrow night at 6, I think is going to be our first, the event to have the biggest combination of humans and dogs. So I have extra doggy treats on hand. This is Chris McLaughlin, who works in our store, who has the book Mississippi Barking. It's the 20th anniversary of Katrina. It's a very important book, and she runs a foundation that continues to save dogs and other animals and have them placed adopted. She'll be talking with the artist Barbara Cohen, who has a new book, Dog Time. So if you're here, come to that. And then Saturday, the first major biography of James Schuyler is out. And we have Howard Curran here. Nathan, sorry. Oh, Nathan. It's been a week. Just got in from Boston. Very excited. That book is amazing. And we were talking, in fact, last night at Sam Garza at a store in Boston afterwards at dinner about how incredible it is that we haven't had a major book out about him. So it's phenomenal. We've got that book in the store now, and then we'll have signed copies. And then you can see the other events that are on there. I just wanted to mention to people, I get asked every once in a while, like, are there events coming up in the fall? Because it's off season, either here or our Boston store that are selling out, we should be aware of. Really, they're all, tickets are going for all these events, but I would say to you, I don't know how they're finding out about it because it's just on our event page, but there's been no publicity yet. But November 2nd at our store in Boston, we have the phenomenal Harvard professor Stephanie Burt, who was here in June for Super Day Poems. Stephanie has coming out end of October the first authorized book on Taylor Swift called Taylor's Version. And so we're going to have November 2nd, the event, and then a party at my friend's new wine top store right next door. That one is selling out. There's no additional charge for the party. It's the same free ticket or $5. We do have, if you've been to my store there, the new store, we can sit at least 100 people comfortably inside. So it's a different scenario than our little store here. So anyway, if you want to go to that. Thank you again. And I want to thank, again, publicly, Amy, because last summer when the park was under construction, they allowed us to come here for many events, and we truly greatly appreciate it. Well, without further ado.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks for coming out. And I have to say that it's really thanking Amy and Jeff for facilitating this. I would never be so bold as to refer to myself as a local writer. I'm not going to say that, but I have spent the better part of every summer in the Outer Cape since 1985. So, wrote, and many of my books were written, in large part here, including this one. The book has a lot of stories going through it, a lot of through lines, some of which I really didn't discover until after the book was done, because you're working on something and and then you stand back when it's done and you see things that you hadn't necessarily thought about. Mm-hmm. So
Thank you.
I'm going to follow for this reading parts of two through lines which seem to me to be appropriate to Provincetown. In this great David Dunlap book, he makes a comparison between Provincetown and Manhattan, and in a way that seems very unlikely, but there are certain things which are absolutely true. You're talking about the density of the place, the fact that Manhattan is perceived as an island off the coast of America. Provincetown is this place, like as far as you can get really from the American mainland, and then there's the overlap in artists and writers and so on. So I had that in mind, and so I'm going to deal with, to some degree, the early history of happenings. I should say right at the outset that happenings originated just across the street at the Sun Gallery. Now it's Utilities, but Red Rooms and his friends were doing stuff in 1959. I think that
57.
Really, were the basis for that. They didn't call them happenings, but it was a kind of artists' theater that was going on. And then I'm also going to talk about the coffee house culture, because as I was saying to somebody before, I first came to Provincetown when I was 15 on a bike trip, and coming down Commercial Street, I could have sworn it was like McDougal Street. I couldn't believe it. So I want to talk about that also, and then at the end, I want to show a very short film which was made by Ken Jacobs and Jack Smith in Provincetown in the summer of 1961, and as far as he showed it at the Sun Gallery. It was not particularly, I'll talk about that, it wasn't particularly well received. I think that this is the first showing of this in Provincetown since then. So I'm very pleased to be able to do that. So having explained the parameters, I'll just get right into these parts of the book. The winter of 1959, coffee house poetry readings took root in New York. Carved from the dank basement of a Greenwich Village tenement at 116 McDougal Street, the main venue was the Gaslight Poetry Cafe. The joint opened in February 1959. The first readings were by Gregory Corso and Allen Ginsberg, followed by Ted Jones, 34-year-old former stockbroker Taylor Mead, and 25-year-old Brooklyn-born Diane DeFreeman. Conveniently downstairs from another beat hangout, the Kettle of Fish Bar, the Gaslight was born in illegality. According to the legend, John Mitchell, a Brooklyn-born Beat Generation fellow traveler in his mid-30s who fathered a child with Jack Kerouac's lost love, Aileen Lee, who started the Figaro and then flipped it very profitably, had dug deeper into the cellar to create more headroom below the exposed pipes, and like a convict tunneling towards freedom, needed to find a way to surreptitiously dispose of the dirt. Even so, the ceilings felt oppressively low. Only 110 patrons were allowed, but Mitchell regularly crammed in more. Because sound traveled up the air shaft into the building's residential floors, he instituted a practice by which, rather than applaud, appreciative patrons snapped their fingers, and who in further signifier of hipness. According to the poet Ed Sanders, who was an NYU student when he was at this time, the finger snap applause was an arrangement worked out with the police. In his comic, semi-fictional memoir, Tales of Beatnik Glory, which I quote a few times. It's irresistible to quote from this book. Sanders writes that the finger snaps were inadequate to satisfy the approval-hungry needs of some poets. For very few, when they had completed their poems and the audience was enthused, there was a flurry of snaps, like someone crashing through twiggy underbrush. But after a poet who was not well received, or not understood, parentheses, not humorous, there were a pitiful 4 or 5 snaps and then a dissolving silence. As coffee houses proliferated, and parenthetically I'll say that this is something that actually started in San Francisco some years before and then migrated to New York. It had already been commercialized in San Francisco by the time it came to New York, and it didn't take long for it to become commercialized in New York either. As coffee houses proliferated, those unwilling to deal with the local mob or navigate the bureaucratic labyrinth necessary to obtain a liquor license became de facto cabarets. And before long, the New York police began issuing summonses. Such harassment would continue for the next several years on what the Village Voice called the main drag of the poetry set. And another thing is that I knew that there was all this legal harassment going on because I wrote about it. But it wasn't until the book was done, I read some of the reviews, that I realized that that's really in part what the book is about. It's just this continual interplay between, you know, liberation and repression. I mean, everything was being busted for one reason or another in New York City in the 60s. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. The thing is that there was this ordinance in the city called the Cabaret Law, which defined a cabaret as any entity that featured dancing and other forms of musical entertainment along with the sale of food or drinks. Came in during Prohibition, but they never got rid of it. Cabarets were licensed by the Department of Consumer Affairs, and from 1940 through 1967, entertainers were required to have a cabaret card, which could be revoked at the discretion of the police. This is an amazingly repressive thing, and this is why, for example, Billie Holiday couldn't perform in New York, Thelonious Monk for a number of years, and there are others. So that was still in effect. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the city itself. For 15 years, I'm taking from the perspective of 1969 or so, New York City, and specifically Manhattan, was understood to be the prime target and hence ground zero in a nuclear war. The intimations of mortality as part of New York Now, E.B. White wrote in 1949, present in the sound of jets overhead in the black headlines in the latest edition. Children entering kindergarten were issued dog tags, and I was one. That's how I know about that. Ruins were already present. Since the end of World War II, huge chunks of Manhattan have been leveled in the name of urban renewal, the new term for slum clearance. Buildings, entire blocks, even whole neighborhoods might disappear as if overnight, often rebuilt in the form of brutalist public housing projects. Many of these were on the Lower East Side. In the 1950s, a red brick palisade of high-rise public housing went up along Avenue D. Many residents arrived since the war were Puerto Rican. The area's remaining Jews were mostly concentrated in older, less monumental public housing south of Delancey Street. They were tearing down block after block, the artist Aldo Tambolini recalled. It looked like a bombed-out area from World War II. Tambolini, who has a complicated history, but he was in Italy he experienced bombing as a child in Italy, and it's obviously stayed with him when he came to the States. He said, "I vividly remember a dismembered wall remaining standing from an old synagogue with a big mural of the Lion of Judah." Greenwich Village was more contested. There were plans to demolish the neighborhood south of Washington Square. The godlike master builder, Robert Moses, sought to extend Fifth Avenue through Washington Square. Although his so-called emergency road was defeated, new apartment buildings sprouted and renovated brownstones appeared among the dilapidated Coldwater flats west of 6th Avenue. The newly finished luxury development in Washington Square Village was a fortress amid the tenements and loft buildings south of Bleecker Street, eventually to be cleared in favor of 3 concrete slabs called Silver Towers. Harlem and East Harlem had public housing projects. So did the area around Pennsylvania Station, not to mention Brooklyn and Queens or the Bronx, which Moses bifurcated with 2 colossal expressways, something which is never recovered from, by the way. Few of these projects were as ambitious as the Lincoln Square renewal project, which despite 4 years of community resistance obliterated the largely black and Puerto Rican neighborhood of San Juan Hills to create space for the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts. It's only recently that there's been any acknowledgement of what happened, you know, to create this Lincoln Center. You cannot rebuild a city without moving people, Moses explained at the May 1959 groundbreaking, an event attended by President Dwight D. Eisenhower that was deemed sufficiently significant to be broadcast live in New York City classrooms, or at least mine, I remember this. You cannot make an omelet without breaking eggs, which he actually said that. A young painter, Ken Jacobs, working as a building superintendent nearby, used the San Juan Hill rubble as a movie set. A movie without a script, shot with a wind-up, spring-driven Bell & Howell 16mm camera. Jacobs' Star Spangled to Death evolved out of his friend Jack Smith's improvised performances. Fearless in making a public spectacle of himself, Smith animated the sooty neorealism of 1950s New York with outlandish fantasy, appearing variously in the guise of a chic, plain matador dressed as a bishop, a turbaned odalisque, or an indescribable walking trash heap. Moreover, he engaged his environment, confounding visitors to the Central Park Zoo with his cardboard headdress, erupting gauze festooned on the Bowery to consternate a conclave of winos, or materializing on St. Mark's Place wearing a paper crown and brandishing a toilet plunger. And that's him on the cover of the book, by the way, from Ken Jacobs' movie Star Spangled to Death. And I have to say that I'm very happy with Verso, the publisher. I wouldn't always say that. And one reason is they asked me for an idea for cover. I sent them this picture, and they just took it. They just put it on the cover. I couldn't believe it.
It's rare.
It's so rare. So rare for that. Jacobs was not the only young artist to take urban detritus as material. Although Tomellini was one, and so was another foreign-born junk collector, 31-year-old sculptor, the Yale-educated son of a Swedish diplomat, and that's Claes Oldenburg. Living on East 4th Street, Oldenburg was picking up rags, ripping apart cardboard boxes, and stuffing his studio with worn burlap bags. He had a piece in the Rubin galleries below, Zero Group Show, and now with the younger Rubin artist, Jim Dine, had taken a 3-month residence in the basement gallery at the Judson Church, a Romanesque edifice originally built just off Washington Square as a mission for the poor. Under the rubric Ray Gun, Oldenburg and Dine installed a pair of complementary environments. Dine's was called the House, where bed springs tangled from the ceiling and the walls were adorned with tapestries made from his wife's discarded clothes. The space was otherwise filled with egg crates and shiny objects that, retrieved from the street, Dine had painted pink and green. To reach his crazy, cozy nest, one had to pass through Oldenburg's less ingratiating installation, The Street, where rather than repurposed dresses, the walls were covered with city cardboard and strips of newspaper. Oldenburg did a lot of things like that. And just to mention, you know, once more, the Sun Gallery, he had his first one-man show of these very things across the street at Utilities. On the evening of February 29th, 1960, and the 2 evenings that followed, Oldenburg and Dine presented a medley of dramatic ray gun specs, so branded to avoid using Alan Capro's term, happenings. Oldenburg's piece was snapshots from the city. They invited Al Hansen, Dick Higgins, Alan Capro, and Robert Whitman to contribute work. No longer much interested in the form he pioneered, Red Rooms bowed out, so he wasn't in that show. Let's see. Originally, Oldenburg contemplated staging snapshots outside in the wintry air, with Thompson Street blocked by a strategically stalled car. The result, suggesting some performances in Star Spangled to Death, would have been clamorous and potentially violent. Moved into the cramped Judson basement, the piece was still uncomfortable. The audience was kept waiting for 15 minutes in the dark before Oldenburg and his partner, Patty Machinsky, he, a homeless rag man, swaddled in tattered bandages and dirty underwear, She, a street chick, wearing a rat-like mask with engorged braids, appeared dramatically framed in the doorway of an adjoining room. Oldenburg's unseen studio assistant, Lucas Samaras, flicked the lights at varying intervals 32 times to create a series of primitively stroboscopic, frozen tableaux vivants. Longer dark intervals were accompanied by recorded car honks, sirens, and shouts over which one heard the artist's retching moans, Wyszynski's yips, and miscellaneous backstage clap. Spectators jostled to see these briefly illuminated tableaus. Ragman and street chick scuffled and writhed, striking various agonized poses before executing a shambolic shimmy to the ground. Nothing in the Capro happenings were nearly as exciting or funny as this. Also, before going on, I'll say that it was interpreted as being one person called Al Hansen called it a Shinbone Alley aftermath of Hiroshima in Manhattan, and Stan Vanderbeek, who filmed it, also called it a black statement about the city in which two people represent the populace after a bomb raid. So I mention this so you can see what the mindset was for these artists who were young people. Okay, let's jump ahead. Okay, back to the coffee houses now. Something that's going on at exactly the same time, a few blocks away. The coffee house wars came to a boil that spring, 1961, with the free speech and civil rights. Oh, no. Sorry, getting ahead of myself. The battle for the village had enjoined in the mid-1950s as the Italian espresso cafes transformed into Americanized coffee houses. The tenement block south of Washington Square proved a magnet for beat poets, folk singers, and all manner of stand-up extroverts. The blind composer, musician Moondog worked the street. The freakish ukulele-strumming falsetto-voiced Tiny Tim was a favorite lesbian bars. Brother Theodore, last name Gottlieb, a German-born concentration camp survivor, introduced an element of Weimar Berlin to the scene with his sardonic audience-baiting rants. Tourists followed. Weekends were hell. Outer-borough kids, like me, clogged the sidewalks. New Jersey cars cruised the narrow streets. In vain, the police attempted to enforce a Sabbath law. If religion is demanded on McDougal Street, insist on it for 42nd Street, Izzy Young told the Village Voice. Izzy Young was the proprietor of the Folklore Center on McDougal Street. It was a sort of like an uncle figure to this whole scene. Beneath the festive banner, hung from a second-floor fire escape, the gaslight sold dishwater espresso and provided free entertainment. A bit more than a year after it opened, Mitchell's Coffee House got national attention when newsman Mike Wallace used the 116 McDougal Street stoop as the location for a TV report on the beats. By the summer of 1960, the Gaslight was a home for poets turned hip raconteurs, as well as the consuls of the folk revival. Poets read for free. The musicians, who initially served to clear the house, expected to get something. One step up from busking, the Gaslight was a basket house, a venue that paid the town for the money that audiences would pitch in at the door. When a cover charge was established, some were actually paid by the week, although conditions did not necessarily improve. Even dressed up with some hanging imitation Tiffany lamps, the place, according to its frequent performer and eventual manager, Dave Van Ronk, a bearish Brooklyn-born 24-year-old high school dropout, was hopelessly filthy, a rat and roach-infested tenement basement. Summer 1960, the Village Voice ran J.R. Goddard's three-part series on McDougal Street, Fruitcake Inferno. Cafe Bazaar, another coffee house, was furnished like a spook house with flying bats and black drapes. The poet Ray Bremser's wife Bonnie worked there as a waitress. Everything about it was gross, intentionally grotesque, and designed to hustle tourists, she remembered. It was also a fire trap, she recalled, always packed and very hot. The management sent its provocatively ghoulish waitresses walking in the neighborhood, bleached hair, dead white makeup, heavy eyeshadow, garish strappies, draped over purple leotards. I should stress the fact that this neighborhood, or the village, was overwhelmingly an Italian neighborhood in the tenements, and that you can understand that they were so not thrilled with what was going on in the neighborhood there. South Village residents were not only agitated by tourists and visiting teenage hordes, but publicity. Incredibly, the Coffee House Association hoped to institute an annual Mardi Gras, the theory being that given the school integration situation, New Orleans had lost its luster as a vacation destination, and this would have served, of course, to drive the locals even crazier. Okay. Now, the Coffee House Wars, which I spent some more pages talking about, came to a boil in the spring of 1961 with the free speech and civil rights battle tabloids dubbed the Beatnik Riot. Were unlicensed folk singers entitled to congregate on Sunday afternoons around the fountain in Washington Square Park? Although the impromptu hootenannies had been going on since 1944, the police, acting under a directive by Mayor Wagner's New City Parks Commissioner, Newbold Morris, began dispersing and arresting folk singers for performing without a permit. And they quote, "Musicians of unsavory appearance had been panhandling in the park. In a way, the folk singers were surrogates for the beats, the blacks, the tourists, and the gay men who cruised the area known as the meat rack along the square's western edge." And this was another thing that was making, like the locals crazy. I mean, there were very few integrated neighborhoods in Manhattan. And actually the Lower East Side would become more integrated than the village. But the fact is that there were African American people there, and in the park and in the clubs and so on. And this was a source of tension. The irony is that, if I can give you a bit of local history, that neighborhood was an African American neighborhood in the 19th century, and they were displaced mainly by immigrants from Southern Europe. Okay, so in response to this, Izzy Young, who just mentioned, organized a protest. Watched by a gathering estimated to be several thousand, some 50 folk bards silently marched into Washington Square. And Ed Sanders, who was around, describes this in Tales of Beatnik Glory. An electric unification seemed to pass into the crowd when the Trigger Pack, a group of 50, many in beatnik clothes and beards, as the New York Times haughtily reported, began to march from the southwest of the park, McDougal and West 4th, in close order yodel formation toward the waiting for inspiration yodel mob, goaded all the while by trained left-leaning folklorists and known novelists. And he's referring to, to Izzy Young and Doc Hughes, who was a guy who was there too. When the demonstrators broke the silent order, the silence order, by singing anthems like the spiritual "We Shall Not Be Moved" and Woody Guthrie's "This Land," the police moved in to disperse the crowds. As the poet reimagined it, back to what Ed Sanders said, the Trigger Pack reached the fountain and began to strum, yodel, pluck, hoot, and to thicken their voices with subversive Appalachian accents. A woman auto-harpist with insolently lengthy tresses stood then upon a hasty platform of guitar cases and began to sing "We Shall Overcome." And that was it. The police walked forward to break up the music. She was just pushing the A7th bar on her harp when bong, they shoved her, and the cases went a skitter. He's embellishing this, but only slightly. In a show of solidarity, Joan Baez had come down from Boston, which was then, that was the real center of the folky center, at that time. And she was, like the star of that scene. So she'd come down from Boston, but she never made it to the square. According to the Times, the auto-harpist was in fact a male and was the first person to be arrested, attempted to strum what the Times called his simple zither-like instrument as the police dragged him off. Reinforcements arrived, fights broke out. Both cops and protesters were knocked to the ground. At the height of the battle, the Times reported, Hundreds of young people, many of the boys with beards or banjos, and many of the girls with long hair or guitars, fought with 50 policemen in clashes across the square. Hundreds more, including some baffled tourists, watched. There were 20 serious injuries and 10 arrests. The event made front-page news, occasioning an iconic tabloid headline in the New York Mirror, 3,000 beatniks riot in the village. And keep in mind also that this is happening and is a way, like inspired by the civil rights movement. I mean, there already have been freedom rides and sit-ins and so on. So it didn't come out of nowhere. But this was a unique event in the village. That night, many prominent folkies, not all of whom had attended the riot, celebrated their victory at Gertie's Folk City. Performers included Doc Watson, Gil Turner, Joan Baez, her sister Mimi, age 16, all of whom I'm sure played here at one time or another. And a 19-year-old kid recently arrived from Minnesota who called himself Bob Dylan. After hustling Joan to hear his latest composition, Song to Woody, Bobby went on to annoy her by hitting on Mimi. And I found out, like listening to the radio this morning, that this is actually the 60th anniversary of Dylan's Forest Hills concert, where he went first time, an electric concert. And they do these things, they have this little thing, 60 years ago, blah, blah, and they described it as like that the audience, booed, didn't like it. And the thing is that, it's in the book, there's a footnote, I actually was there. And I can tell they are so wrong. Kids loved it. Kids loved it. If they were booing Murray. It was fun. That's what kids were doing. They were singing along with it. It was the first time that anybody heard "When You're Lost in the Rain" in Juarez. And people burst out laughing when they heard that line, or when they were singing along with, Mr. Jones, Ballad of the Thin Man. Kids loved it. It was not like some kind of, horrible, traumatic experience, least of all for Bob Dylan. Okay. Meanwhile, what was going on in Provincetown? And this whole thing that I'm going to read now, I did the research for it in this library. And just by way of introduction, I should say that there was a lot of, Provincetown was a place, obviously, that was significant to New York artists, painters in particular. But, it was, I think Wellfleet was maybe more literate, I don't know. But Provincetown certainly, was a draw for art. So, Provincetown, summer of 1961. The jazz pianist Mose Allison was in residence in Atlantic House, and La Dolce Vita was in heavy rotation at the Provincetown Art Cinema. Breathless played there too, as did Paul Mybasius, the beatnik film, on a bill with Joseph von Sternberg's The Blue Angels. Directed by young academic Richard Schechner, who would later go on to create Dionysus in '69, one of the most explosive performances of the period. The East End Players, stage productions of No Exit, Perhaps Last Tape, and several UNESCO plays, all things which had been playing in the village. I mean, the village was like the home of theater of the absurd in New York. As well as a version of Sophocles' Philoctetes on the beach in North Truro. There was an art exhibit to benefit the Freedom Riders, work contributed by 30-odd artists, including Hans Hoffman, who was still giving classes, and George Siegel. The fourth issue of the Provincetown Review, something that probably should be better known than it is, included poems by Allen Ginsberg, Leroy Jones, and Diane de Prima, fiction by Susan Sontag, Rosalind Drexler's first published piece, an autobiographical sketch, plus art by Elaine de Kooning and Franz Klein. The Provincetown Review was also, that summer, in court. The previous issue of Bill Ward's ambitious literary magazine, published during the summer of 1960, included an excerpt from Hubert Selby's Last Exit to Brooklyn.
Oh boy.
Yeah, in which Tra-La-La, a waterfront prostitute, suffers a brutal, graphically described gang rape. An 18-year-old kid from Warwick, Rhode Island, purchased a copy in the Lobster Pot on Provincetown Street and got Ward to sign it. And Ward, I've since learned, was actually living also on Commercial Street at the site of the Alden Gallery. So brought it back to Warwick, and his parents discovered it. They filed a complaint with Provincetown police, and on July 4th, nearly a year after the magazine was purchased, Ward was arrested for selling an obscenity to a minor. The trial was set for a month later in Boston, and I'm pretty sure that the presiding judge also lived in Provincetown. Okay. Now, I should say that while doing this, writing this chapter, I interviewed 4 then young people who spent the summer of 1961 in Provincetown. Not one remembered this incident. And I just think, you know, everything is now. They had other things that they were interested in. I mean, this was just one, you know, like a part of the slideshow. And it's not as if this kind of literary busts were infrequent. This was happening in New York all the time. In fact, The Voice covered this, you know. Anyway, none of them remember this. The entire transcript of the trial was published in the issue that appeared the following summer. Editor jailed. Judge Robert A. Welsh, right? Here. The son and grandson of Massachusetts judges quickly found Ward guilty. I mean, what has changed? The case was dismissed as quickly on appeal, largely because the minor who purchased the obscene material was not in fact a minor. So there we have it. Okay, so there was a lot of other stuff going on. Tourists, artists, art students, beatniks strolled the streets, some famous like Gregory Corso, others still obscure, notably Ken Jacobs and Jack Smith. Smith coincidentally had a photograph published in the previous summer's Provincetown Review, the one that had the selfie piece. Washing dishes for 65 cents an hour, Jacobs was hired by the newly renovated Crown and Anchor on Commercial Street to spear trash on the beach. Smith also found a restaurant job from which he was soon fired for stealing food. As Smith, and you know, another thing is as you know, people, it was possible to live on the beach. I mean, it wasn't exactly legal, but people did it. What Ken Jacobs told me was that he and Smith lived in an overturned boat somewhere. Does anybody know what he was talking about at the end of Provincetown, you know, down towards Heron Cove?
Well, there was Prescott's, which was a submarine in a tree.
Could that have been?
Yeah.
I mean, it could seem like
I was there, but I was 65.
No, maybe it was. You know, it got elevated.
Yeah.
Anyway, they as they had amused themselves with street theater in New York, they began performing their Human Wreckage Review on the beach, teaming up with 2 Rhode Island School of Design students, Alice Myers and Florence Carf. Passing the hat, while a 3rd student, nicknamed Martha the Scorch, provided their antics with a bluesy accompaniment. After the police chased them off, the abstract expressionist painter who managed the Crown and Anchor, and I don't know, I mean, Ken didn't remember his name, but then maybe somebody knows it, what painter this would have been, allowed them to perform their review for a few days. In addition to making drawings to sell, Jacobs worked up a few posters for Richard Schechner's East End Players. Smith may have auditioned for the director, who not surprisingly was shocked by his extravagant performances. Jacobs, however, documented that. After shooting some footage of Smith skidding down the dunes, Jacobs brought his star to the venerable Alden Street Cemetery. Now, I just learned, I had, you know, got it wrong. I thought it was the Winthrop Street Cemetery, but I will correct that in the next edition. There is one. Dressed in a nightgown with wings, crowned with a soft pistachos, and wielding a scepter that incorporated a crocheted doll, Smith's fairy vampire skipped amid the graves, balanced on the cemetery fence, and posed with a leer in front of a large crypt. Jacobs had 2 rolls of Kodachrome 2 and used them both. The men then had a jealous quarrel over Carp. She went back to RISD. Smith returned to New York. Jacobs remained in Provincetown past the end of the season. There at the Sun Gallery, site of Red Broom's 1959 happenings and Oldenburg's 1960 show of collage newspapers and burnt edge cardboard, he presented something he called The Death of Ptown, along with another movie that he made with Smith. During the making of Star Spangled and Death. If the progression of Grooms to Oldenburg to Jacobs was natural, if you think of their interests, Ptown was not appreciated. Jacobs was booed. And he told me the people who ran the gallery were terrific, but not the audience. So now we'll have a second chance, to let us. I brought this little film, and over to you.
Okay. Yep, I got the list. Sorry, we shut down.
Oh, all right.
Okay, hold on.
Well, I feel like mission was accomplished to show this movie again. And anybody has any questions about the movie or about the book? Billy Boy's.
I looked on the internet to try and get that film so I can see it ahead of time, and I couldn't find it.
Well, you have to go to YouTube and look for The World, spelled W-H-I-R-L-E-D. This is World, World. Because what Ken Jacobs did was he put together 3 short movies from the early '60s, and this is one of the 3. So, but you'll find that Court found it in a second. You know, I wasn't even sure how to get it. So that's what you have to look for.
You know, one of the things I found most fascinating about your book, and I've read it, this is spectacular, was the role of journalists in documenting it, but also producing it and getting arrested and you know, surviving on.
Well, you know, I'm glad you mentioned that, since, you know, I was, you know, a journalist at the Village Voice for decades, and in a way, the book is an homage to journalists and journalism. And I should say that a lot of this stuff was performative. So if somebody didn't write about it, you know, there was no video. It was too expensive to make films. I mean, there's, you know, like some photographs, although an amazing amount of them were done by Fred McDarrah, the Voice's photographer. But if there hadn't been, you know, the Voice and the other underground papers, this stuff, there'd be no record. So I went through every issue of the Voice in this period, and then, you know, East Village Other and Rat later on, and you know, they're not online. So that's another thing, because it's sad to say that, you know, it's as if something's not online, it doesn't exist. You know, I mean, I know it's very sad. You know, I would be at Columbia going through the stuff on the microfilm. I would be the only person there. I mean, there's like incredible, you know, there are archives on microfilm. There's so much stuff that's not online. And yeah.
Do you think the Anthology Film Archive is amazing that they're programming today? Is this kind of stuff still? And people go, it's amazing.
Every 2 days.
It's really good. Yeah.
I mean, I did a they let me program show, you know, for the book for you know, 5 days, and it was incredible.
And it gets an audience too. I mean,
they filled the theater. They do very well. Yeah. So there's
They have memberships. Be a member of Anthology.
Yeah.
I just want to mention the name of the Sun Gallery people.
Sure.
Yvonne Anderson and Val Falcone, who really were pioneers. All of the people they showed have gone on to interesting careers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe I've missed it, but I don't know if there's ever been really an exhibit devoted to.
There's one right now.
Where?
In the Hammock Gallery. It's called Bob Thompson and his friends.
Oh, really? Where is that?
Oh, I looked it up. I didn't see it even a
It's
minute.
across from that base. It's up on
So
the
it's right there.
platform.
Yeah, great. I'll get it over.
You have some drawings there.
It's often not open,
Oh.
but it's like a pink orange building.
Yeah.
It's up on stilts. It
Yeah.
used to be a hammock.
Yeah.
It's open on weekends.
It's open on weekends.
Yeah, they're construction workers, the guys that run it.
All right, so
The building.
I'll still be here on Saturday.
For those of us from New York, watching the film, it was fascinating because I'm thinking of Roll Arena in New York, who was a famous skater who would often be in the parades, and watching that, she's like a fairy godmother for a lot of us that at my age. but there's someone that was doing it before she was even doing it,
Yeah,
so.
well, you know, his most famous or infamous was the movie Flaming Creatures.
Where there, the whole audiences would go to jail. They bought the projector over the
Yeah,
projection
that's right.
for some reason, as if he booked the film.
That's right.
That was really great. You go to the movies and how was the movie? Well, the whole audience got arrested. That's really.
And it was SDS used it as an organizing tool.
Yeah.
And they didn't really care so much about the movie, but they knew that if they showed it, you know, somebody would get the administration to call the police, and then there would be, you know, like a campus riot.
But Bob Whitman always said they should do a remake of Flaming Creatures. That's Bob Whitman's point of view.
But I don't know that it would ever have that. I don't think it could have the same.
No, of course.
When people went to jail for one limp penis, that's the only thing. Come a long way.
It's true.
Yes.
So, I'm curious about the film. I'm kind of like puzzled about it.
Mm.
Could you or anyone in the audience just comment on
Oh, what he was doing.
what he intended or what you see?
Well, he had been working on this film for years, which has this fantastic title, Star Spangled to Death, which was, Smith wasn't the only person in it. But the thing is that Jack Smith was an incredible performer. And as I said, you know, that's him on the cover of the book. I mean, he was completely fearless in going, you know, like performing on the street and dressing up in these outlandish clothes, you know, very creative, and also was a dancer, was very graceful. I mean, he, you know, could carry this off. So he and Jacobs had been working on this long movie, and a lot of it was kind of improvised. I mean, the thing with Jack Smith, he didn't really direct him. He just, you know, he picked out his cop, you know, like he just put him in a situation and he would do what he was going to do. So I think that they had the idea that they could make a longer film in Provincetown, and that this would have been part of it. This would have been one scene. It's just a fragment, and that's why he says, you know, it's a fragment of a movie that never was, and so that's what it is. It's not a finished film. He did, you know, finish other films with Jack Smith. In fact, there's a movie that was shown a lot with Flaming Creatures called Blonde Cobra, in which he inherited footage that somebody else had taken of Smith for a kind of comic horror film. And then, you know, Smith was a very volatile guy. I mean, very, you know, it was not, you know, particularly not easy to get along with it. So, of course, there was inevitably a falling out over this other film. And a filmmaker who was a friend of both of theirs just gave the footage to Ken Jacobs, and then Ken Jacobs just cut it the way he felt like it, and recorded a soundtrack with Jack Smith. So, I mean, that's, you know, the thing is that film was expensive. I mean, you know, there used to be a joke about underground filmmakers. You opened up the refrigerator, you know, there was like some curdled milk, you know, and some boxes of film. I mean, and so, you know, it was, they became very pragmatic, and Jacobs would have been an example of that. So what you have basically is a riff. I mean, it's almost entirely edited in the camera. You only have 2 rolls of film, and I think it's what, about 6. I mean, a roll of 16 millimeter film would have been just under 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, he used probably virtually all the film to do this, and, you know, Jack Smith made his costume. I mean, nobody could have, you know, done that. I mean, when some years ago I was involved in it. It was a wonderful show at PS1 in New York, just like the entirety of Jack Smith's stuff, and including these costumes which he had. And in a way, it was slightly hyper real because Mary Brett, I think, redid that. You know, she cleaned the costume. I mean, they were in such disarray. She cleaned so they probably looked better than they ever looked. But even so, it was astounding to see this room of these costumes that he created. And this guy was, you know, like he was a real Renaissance man in his life. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I haven't finished it yet, but we get to the end, and is there more coming? Is it, why stop there? Is
Well-
the conclusion of this great spirit, or?
Well, I have, when you get to, you'll see that I say some things at the end, why I stopped there. The short answer is that I stopped at a point after I wrote something for the Village Voice. I mean, I had been, around, I was a teenager, I was out of school and living in New York, went to Mexico and so on. And when I came back, it was the first time that Flaming Creatures had been shown since the series of busts which happened. It became like, you read the book, you'll see that it went right to the Congress. I mean, it was, like an amazing, issue, and it pretty much, I think it damaged Jack Smith for life to have this, have the burden of what happened to a movie which he saw as a kind of a comedy and not, like at all, like a constitutional issue. But anyway, I came back from Mexico. I saw the movie. I'd seen other things by him. I was completely knocked out by it, and just like on the spur of the moment, I wrote something about it, and I sent it to the Voice over the transom. And I did not know it was going to be published until I picked up the paper, and there it was. And of course, my friends, what, you wrote for that sellout rag? It was a little traumatic for me too, but I stopped at that point because then I felt that, like, up until before that, I had been like either somebody who knew about things by reputation, or like had seen some stuff or participated in a very minor way. But then I felt that, like, after I wrote this, I was, in some way part of this, even if it was a small thing. And then, that what happened was, as I explained, that, totally changed my life. I mean, because then, it started, like what was would be a decades-long, involvement with the Village Voice and with, like film criticism and cultural journalism and so on. And so that's one reason why I stopped there. I mean, that's the good reason. Other thing was, I think that things had, there was a kind of crisis, I feel, also that happened, which I talk about in the book at the, in the early 70s. But that's another subject. Why that is, you can deduce that probably from the book.
What I found fascinating was seeing Yoko Ono all over the place. And I mean,
She was a real person.
yeah.
She had a real career. She was a significant entity before she, like, married a Beatle. Yeah.
She was Bjork first.
Yes, and I actually think that her first LP is pretty good. Sang with the Ornette Coleman before, so. Yeah.
When all the other jazz guys were saying he's too weird.
They thought that he was weird. Some of them, yeah. Particularly the, yes. But he was a polarizing figure, Ornette Coleman. So it's in the book.
It's interesting you mentioned McDougal Street, because we were doing theater there in the early 2000s, and we were meeting in a coffee shop on McDougal Street, writing. We had this whole thing, spontaneous combustion, so we used to have 24 to 48 hours to write the whole play, and then have to perform it.
Yeah.
And that had a nice run, and now it's like the building is taken over, the coffee shop is gone.
Yeah.
So, like, I would say up until maybe 2002, when the recession hit, like there was still a scene going on. But after that, I gotta say it sort of dissipated, and I don't even know. I'm quite sure those buildings aren't housing those projects anymore.
No, probably not. No, I mean, I wouldn't say, you gotta go to Brooklyn.
Queens.
Queens, yes, Ridgewood. Ridgewood, yeah. That would be a shock, since I'm from, the idea of like returning to. Yes.
I was wondering if you could talk a bit how long this has been germinating for you as a project, and I'm sure it's a part of history that generates a lot of fascination and interest, and there's other versions of it where this comes in.
Well, I have a kind of glib answer for that, because, I mean, but it's not, but it's true. Book took me about 3.5 years to write, which for me is not, that's okay. That's not an unduly long amount of time. But then I said that it was really, like, I got the idea for it like 50 years ago, so I never could have written it then. I mean, I had to have, like a tremendous amount of distance, and then I think it was also, I hate to say it, I think it was like an aging thing, like I wanted to do it. I mean, I really, really wanted to do it. My agent thought it was a terrible idea. I mean, but I didn't care. I mean, so that's how it
What was the editing process?
yeah, he was spoken like somebody who knows. No, the editing again, Verso was great, but in such a crazy way, because the guy who acquired the book was an old pal of mine from the boys. I don't know if you know, Andy Shaw. He was at Verso, and then he left. We got into a dispute. He was he was a union guy, and Verso, they're lefties, but they don't like unions, surprisingly. And he left, and then, but the new guy that was coming in, I met with him. He was a very sympathetic guy. I liked him. We had a great lunch and so on. And then, because I was worried, it's going to be an orphan book. I mean, and then this guy just like went AWOL. I don't know if he had a nervous breakdown or what. It was really crazy. I just would be like, but so he didn't. And the book was essentially edited by a production guy, and I was so lucky. This guy, who I think when he was a kid, he's probably like 30 years old or something. He just got really into the material. He really, really liked it. I mean, they gave this back to me 6 times, 6 or 7. I've never had an experience like that where somebody went over. Usually they do it once, and then like you live with all the copy errors that you can't find. I mean, so yeah. I mean that's I was very lucky in that sense. It's like with Verso taking the cover, it sort of like got through without a. I mean, I signed a contract for 120,000 words, which I knew was going to be longer than that. So I delivered it was like 165,000 words. So actually, the guy with the nervous breakdown said, take 5,000 words. I said, why? I can do that. Still a bunch of footnotes. And that's it had a happy story. They don't know as you know.
Sounds familiar.
I just gotta say, the footnotes are some of the funniest parts of the book.
Well, I love footnotes.
I think I did footnotes, not endnotes.
That's right. I insisted on that. Yeah. They got it. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well, truly my